Now we're going to talk about the movements of synovial joints. Remember, synovial joints are freely movable, so they allow for various types of movements. The first one is gliding. Gliding is like moving your hand back and forth across, for instance, the desk. The next group of movements, it's easier to watch a video of them and actually see the movement than to actually just describe them. So for these, I'll show you a YouTube video that shows these movements. In addition to those various movements, we also have special movements. So all of these will also be shown on the video, except for opposition. So let me point out opposition to you. Opposition is basically using your opposable thumb. It's basically any movement that has grasping with your thumb. So we have flexion. Here we're flexing the forearm. Extension. We're now extending the forearm. Flex and extend. Dorsiflexion. Plantar flexion. Okay. Pushing the ball of your foot down as if you're wearing high heels. So dorsiflexion, plantar flexion. Elevation. Like shrugging your shoulders up. Depression. Pushing your shoulders back down. Elevate and depress. Eversion. Inversion. Inversion, like rolling out your ankle. Abduction. I like to think of abduct as pulling away or taking away. You might have heard of, for instance, getting those Amber Alerts with child abduction. Again, that's taking away. So abduction is taking the body part away from your midline. The opposite is adduction. So now you're moving the limb back towards your midline. Abduct with the B. Adduct. Now we have rotation. Lateral rotation. Medial rotation. Lateral. Medial. Pronation. Supination. I like to think about turning your palm upward as if you're holding a cup of soup. Supination. Pronation. Supination. Retraction. Protraction. Retract and protract. You can also retract and protract your head, which is what they show you in the book. It almost looks like from the 80s, the walking like an Egyptian. So now we've gone through all of the various and special types of movements of synovial joints. So next, let's take a look at some selected synovial joints. So there's many different synovial joints that your textbook goes over, and we won't have time to discuss all of them. So I've just chosen 3 synovial joints which I thought were interesting and very relevant to this day and age. So the types of synovial joints are based on structure and function. So the three that we're going to cover right now are the wrist, hip, and knee. So let's start off with the wrist. The wrist is what's called a condylar joint. So if you look at here, we've got all of our carpals right here, and then we have our radius and ulna up here, and then the phalanges, the metacarpals, and phalanges down here. So what we're looking at when we look at the wrist joints is we're looking at the intercarpal joints, basically all of the joints between those individual carpal bones. Remember, you have 8 individual carpal bones. So if you were to actually look at the wrist, you'll notice you barely see the bones. Instead, there's all of these ligaments joining the carpal bones and connecting to the radius and ulna and the metacarpals beneath. So you guys probably have heard of carpal tunnel syndrome. So carpal for the wrist, and the tunnel syndrome is basically when you get wrist pain. A lot of times you can get it, for instance, from typing too much. And the problem is that you get wear and tear of these ligaments down in the carpal. And when you get wear and tear of the ligaments, basically now you're pinching on the nerves that run through the arm and into the fingers. You see those in yellow. And then when you pinch those nerves, that's what causes the pain. So how do we help fix carpal tunnel syndrome? A lot of it is just to not use the wrist in that movement anymore. So you stabilize the wrist, for instance, with the brace, and therefore you rest the ligaments so they're not inflamed, and therefore hopefully that will reduce the pain. We have the hip joint. We talked about the hip joint before when we were looking at the hip and the femur. So the hip joint is considered a ball and socket joint. So the ball being the head of the femur, and the socket being the acetabulum of your hip bone. So the head of the femur goes into the acetabulum, so the ball goes into the socket. Now if you look here, you can see here's the hip, that's the obturator foramen, the hole, and the acetabulum in there. And then here's the head of the femur underneath. Notice there's all of these ligaments that are attaching to help stabilize this joint. And you can see the ligaments are actually attaching to the greater and lesser trochanters. Remember, those trochanters are points of muscle or ligament attachment. So now here's the picture without the ligaments. So you can see the head of the femur right here, the ball, and it's sitting in the acetabulum, the socket of the hip. So you might have heard of hip replacement. So let's think about what happens in a hip replacement surgery. Do you A, remove and replace the bone of the femur head, B, repair tendons, muscles, and ligaments, C, clean up cartilage, or D, all of the above? The answer is D, all of the above. So all of these are true in hip replacement surgery. So let's take a look at an image and discuss this. All right, so here on the left side, we have a bad hip. So notice right here, here's the head of the femur and the acetabulum. And notice that the surface is really rough and bumpy. That's the cartilage that's worn down. And now you're going to have some bone on bone. So that's, of course, very painful. So this is why we need a hip replacement. So remember, when you break your hip, it's not the hip bone itself that breaks, it's normally the neck of the femur. Similar, when you have hip replacement surgery, you're not replacing the hip bone itself, you're actually replacing the head of the femur. So notice here, we now have a metal ball as the head, and then this new part for the acetabulum. So, of course, before we do this, we need to clear out all of the damaged cartilage, because if you leave damaged cartilage in there, it'll be painful. You put in the new head, and then we're going to have to attach, of course, the femur to the hip with ligaments right here. And that would make for a complete hip replacement. Next, we have the knee joint. The knee joint is called a hinge joint. Think of a hinge like the hinge on a door, right? It goes back and forth, basically in 2 different directions, and that's it. So the same thing with your knee, right? You can straighten it and bend it, and that's about it. So what we're looking at here is an anterior view. The patella is removed, so cartoon version on the left, real human knee on the right. Here's the patella flapping down here. What we see are 2 very important structures. One here coming in through the front is the anterior crucial ligament, or ACL, and that helps attach the femur on the top to the tibia on the bottom. The second is that meniscus that we had looked at earlier. The meniscus is in blue here, it's cartilage, and it basically lines the top of the tibia so that the femur can come down and basically be cushioned by the meniscus. So these are two very important structures in the knee joint. Now you might have heard of an injury such as a torn meniscus. So here we have, for instance, very common injury in football. Right here, this is the meniscus, and notice right there, there's a tear. Okay? So a lot of times you can get a torn meniscus or even a torn ACL if you have a lateral blow to the knee, and that'll cause the knee to be damaged and tear the meniscus and or the ACL. Finally, let's discuss some disorders of the joint. So, common joint injuries. First, we had just talked about torn cartilage. So you can have the torn ACL or, for instance, the torn knee meniscus. Not only could it happen from one sharp blow, but it also can happen from overuse. Just constant using of the joint will wear it out and possibly tear the cartilage. Another common injury is a sprain. So, for instance, you might sprain your ankle. Here, a ligament is stretched or torn. So you can see right here, there is that fibrous ligament that's supposed to be connecting the fibula onto the talus bone. And when you roll out your ankle, you could sprain it. And again, right here, you have the torn ligament. Dislocation or a luxation. That's when bone becomes out of alignment. For instance, here the head of the humerus should sit nicely into the glenoid cavity of the scapula. But when you dislocate your shoulder, notice the head has come out. Remember, double-jointed people are more likely to dislocate because the ligaments they have that are keeping the head of the humerus into the scapula, those ligaments are loose, and therefore the head is more likely to pop out. So with a dislocated shoulder or any dislocated joint, you want to try and pop the bone back into its original position. Arthritis is an inflammatory or degenerative disease that damage the joints. So here we've got, again, the knee joint. We got the femur on the top, tibia below, and the fibula off to the side. This is a nice normal joint. And here you have an osteoarthritic joint. So notice there's not a nice even space between the two bones. Notice they're slightly out of alignment. And again, that's because the joint itself is deteriorating. Next, we have rheumatoid arthritis. This is an autoimmune disorder. Basically when your own body system is attacking itself, and where it attacks is at the joint. So here on the left, you see a rheumatoid arthritic hand, and then on the right is a normal relaxed hand. So you can tell here, look at the stiffness of the joint. Basically what happens is that the bones start to fuse together because the joint itself is not proper with the cartilage in between. So the bones, for instance here, the metacarpals down to the phalanges are now fusing, which means the joint's going to be very stiff and you actually can't move your joint anymore. And sometimes the fingers here, these are straight, but sometimes they even fuse a little crooked. And so rheumatoid arthritis is very, very painful because, again, the bones are fusing together, and when they do that, they're going to pinch and cause pain in the nerves. So to summarize, we know that joint can be classified by movement or structure. Synovial joints have a common structure that allows various movements. Representative synovial joints are wrist, hip, and knee. And then we finished up with some disorders of the joints.